His sole intention was to order a steak. Yet, the small piece of paper that the waitress presented to him along with the bill completely altered everything. Initially, no one seemed to notice him when he entered. It was a sluggish Wednesday afternoon in Fort Smith, Arkansas. The asphalt shimmered with heat, and a heavy, weary silence permeated the atmosphere, making everything feel more profound. The steakhouse itself was located in a worn-out strip mall, nestled between a liquor store and a check-cashing establishment. It appeared to be an unremarkable place, merely another spot to grab lunch, pass through, and subsequently forget. However, Daniel Whitmore was not simply passing through. He walked in wearing faded denim, boots that showed more age than polish, a low-brimmed, worn cap, and a brown leather jacket that clearly indicated extensive travel. He moved with the calm, quiet, and unassuming manner that older black men often adopt in unfamiliar settings. His gaze remained steady, his voice hushed, and his posture neutral. This behavior stemmed not from fear, but from deep-seated habit. An old habit. The young host at the front desk barely bothered to look up from his digital screen. "Table for one," he mumbled. "Yes," Daniel replied evenly, "somewhere quiet, if it's not too much trouble." The host then led him to a booth positioned near the front window. It was table 7. This spot offered him a view of the room while also providing a clear sightline to the kitchen door. Daniel settled into the seat, placing his hands flat on the table. His eyes scanned the environment, not his head. He was intently observing. He picked up the menu and browsed it as if he were unfamiliar with the establishment, though he already knew what he intended to order. Daniel Whitmore was not merely a patron. He was in fact the owner. He was the founder of what had once been a respected southern chain, Whitmore's Chop House. The business began with a single location in Tulsa in 1996. It expanded to include 17 restaurants across 5 states. Subsequently, he had taken a step back from daily operations. He allowed others to manage the routine while he concentrated on strategic operations, partnerships, and more recently, battling to preserve his company's legacy. This particular Fort Smith branch was performing very poorly. It suffered from negative Yelp reviews, slow service times, and high staff turnover. There were also financial records that did not reconcile. His team provided explanations and excuses. Daniel, however, was not interested in those. He sought the unvarnished truth. Therefore, he visited the location himself, unannounced and undercover. The restaurant was only half full, quiet, and appeared exhausted. The servers moved as if on eggshells, and the kitchen staff barely peeked out through the swinging doors. Then, a waitress approached his table. "Good afternoon, sir. My name's Jenna." Daniel lifted his gaze and met her eyes. She appeared to be a white woman in her mid to late 20s, with her hair tied in a messy bun and her sleeves pushed up. She looked visibly exhausted and guarded. "Good afternoon," Daniel said. "What do people typically order here?" Jenna briefly glanced at the menu, as if it personally offended her. "The ribeye is still decent," she offered. "It comes with mashed potatoes and collard greens." "I'll have that," he responded, closing the menu. "Medium rare," he specified. She nodded and walked away without further comment. Daniel leaned back in his seat. He slowly scanned the room once more. Near the bar stood a man, a large individual with a buzz cut and a tight polo shirt, seemingly trying too hard to appear important. His arms were crossed, and he observed the staff as if they were liabilities. This person had to be the manager. The steak arrived more quickly than anticipated. It was good, cooked correctly, and the plate was warm. The kitchen staff evidently still maintained some level of pride, but the overall atmosphere remained unsettling. Jenna returned, her eyes downcast, and refilled his coffee. She placed the check down with a folded receipt tucked inside. Daniel waited, watching her walk away smoothly and steadily, as if nothing out of the ordinary had occurred. Then he unfolded the note. It was not a receipt. Written in blue ink were 6 words. "If you're really who I think you are, please don't leave without talking to me." Daniel blinked. He reread it. His pulse did not quicken, nor did his expression change outwardly, but internally, everything shifted. Across the room, reflected in the window, he observed Jenna watching him, though not directly, just enough for him to realize her seriousness. He had come seeking answers. But now he understood he was in the midst of something far more significant than mere financial discrepancies. Whatever this situation was, it had deep roots, and it would not be resolved simply with a spreadsheet. Daniel remained motionless, one hand resting on his coffee mug, the other clutching the folded note beneath the table. He did not look around or react outwardly, but the note irrevocably altered his perspective. In those 6 brief words, Jenna had confirmed 2 crucial facts. Firstly, she knew precisely who he was, and secondly, something serious was amiss in the establishment, unrelated to slow service. Daniel had witnessed similar situations before, perhaps not in this exact form, but certainly in spirit. He recognized the pattern of employees working in fear, managers concealing information, and stories being suppressed beneath routine operations. However, the critical difference here was that someone had genuinely reached out, doing so quietly and courageously. He glanced toward the kitchen again. The large man, Bryce, if Daniel had heard correctly earlier, still stood near the kitchen pass, feigning attention to a clipboard. But Daniel could discern that Bryce was observing. Not just the food, but the people, controlling the room through silence and his intimidating presence. The kind of manager who prioritized instilling fear over earning respect. Daniel slowly stood, placed some cash on the table, and walked toward the front with the check in hand. The host barely looked up again, mumbling, "You have a good night, sir." Daniel did not reply. Instead of heading directly out, he turned down a narrow hallway marked, "Employees Only, Restrooms." He did not walk quickly, just casually enough not to arouse suspicion. Behind him, he heard Bryce's voice, flat and suspicious, "Sir, restrooms are on the other side." Daniel paused and turned slightly. "Looking for the manager," he stated. "That would be me," Bryce replied, his tone sharper now, yet still cloaked in a veneer of customer service politeness. Daniel studied him. "Are you free to talk?" he asked. Bryce raised an eyebrow. "About what?" "Just a word with my server," Daniel clarified. Bryce stepped closer, his arms now crossed. "If you have a complaint, you bring it to me. You don't pull my staff off the floor. That's not how this works." Daniel looked him directly in the face, his voice still calm. "Then I guess you'll have to get used to it working differently," he stated. There was a lengthy pause. Bryce scrutinized him, perhaps attempting to place him or realizing that Daniel was not merely another customer, but Daniel did not flinch. Finally, Bryce scoffed. "She's probably in the back closing up," he said. Daniel turned without another word and proceeded toward the back hallway. He found Jenna carrying a crate of lemons. She stopped when she saw him, her eyes widening slightly, not with surprise, but with fear and urgency. "What are you doing back here?" she asked under her breath. "Got your note," Daniel said. "Now talk." Jenna looked around, then pulled him toward the storage closet at the end of the hall. It was a small space, smelling of cleaning supplies and burnt fryer oil. She closed the door behind them and took a deep breath. "I wasn't sure if you'd read it or if you'd even still be here," she confessed. "You mentioned something wasn't right," Daniel prompted. Jenna rubbed her face. She looked utterly exhausted, with the kind of fatigue that sleep cannot alleviate. "Bryce isn't just rude," she began. "He's dangerous. Food deliveries go missing. Liquor counts don't add up. Cash drawers are always off, but only on nights he closes. He cuts hours on the schedule, then clocks people out early in the system so payroll doesn't see the truth." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "And no one said anything." "They're scared," Jenna explained. "We all are. If you speak up, he either writes you up for made-up reasons or just removes your shifts from the board. One server caught him pocketing cash from the bar. She was gone by the weekend." Daniel absorbed all this slowly, without betraying any emotion. "Why tell me?" he asked. "I worked at your Bentonville location 6 years ago," Jenna explained. "You came in for the opening. You probably don't remember, but you gave me a $100 tip just for checking in on a customer who was choking. You said that I had initiative." Daniel blinked slowly. "I remember that," he admitted. "I saw your face today. I didn't think you'd come back. Not like this." Daniel nodded once. "I needed to see it for myself," he stated. "Well, Jenna said. "You're seeing it?" He observed her, not with suspicion, but with a quiet respect. It was the way a man who has been overlooked, underestimated, and dismissed learns to recognize someone else who has endured similar experiences. "All right," he finally said. "I'm coming back tomorrow, but I'm not coming back as a stranger." Jenna swallowed, then looked at the door. "Then you should leave through the side," she advised. "Bryce has cameras on the front." Daniel slipped the note back into his pocket. "Are you going to be all right?" he asked. "I've made it this far," she replied. Daniel didn't smile, but he nodded as he walked out the back door, now certain of one thing: he wasn't just dealing with poor management. He was dealing with a deep corruption. And corruption had to be eliminated. Daniel did not go home. He checked into an inexpensive motel 10 minutes away. It had fluorescent lights, peeling paint, and a front desk behind glass. It was the type of place that didn't ask questions and offered little more than a bed and 4 walls. The room faintly smelled of cigarettes and bleach. But he didn't mind. He had stayed in worse places. He sat on the edge of the bed, the crumpled note from Jenna still in his jacket pocket. Her words resonated in his mind: dangerous threats. People disappearing off the schedule. He had always prided himself on creating workplaces where people desired to be, particularly for individuals who were often ignored or relegated to the background. This included kitchen staff, single mothers, high school students, and retired veterans, the very people society often failed to value as assets. He acknowledged that he did not operate perfect restaurants, but he ran fair ones. This situation, however, was unequivocally unfair. At 10:17 p.m., his phone vibrated. It was an unknown number, just a text message: "Side lot by the dumpster. 11 p.m. Come alone." There was no name, no superfluous details, just clear instructions. Daniel did not hesitate. By 10:58 p.m., he was there, leaning against the brick wall behind the restaurant, his eyes fixed on the shifting shadows beneath the flickering security light. He kept his hands in his jacket pockets. It appeared to be an ordinary night, but his mind was exceptionally sharp. At 11:03 p.m., the back door quietly opened. Jenna slipped out, her hoodie pulled up, moving quickly yet silently. She glanced around as if expecting to be followed. "Thanks for showing up," she whispered. "I said I would," Daniel replied. "Did anyone see you?" he asked. "No," she answered, motioning toward the alley. "Let's walk." They moved together in silence until they reached the far side of the lot. The low hum of a freezer fan buzzed in the background. Jenna finally turned to face him. "I had to be sure you were serious," she explained. "Most people would have just thrown that note away." "I'm not most people," Daniel stated. "I'm starting to see that," she replied. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small silver key, handing it to him wrapped in a paper napkin. "That opens his locker in the back room," she explained. "Black duffel bag. He keeps a second phone in there. Burner. I've seen him use it when he thinks no one's looking." Daniel's eyebrows lifted slightly. "You've been watching him?" he asked. "Someone had to," she retorted. "You know this could put your job at risk?" Daniel warned. Jenna scoffed. "My job was already at risk the minute I started asking questions," she stated, "but I can't keep watching him walk all over people. Cut hours, pocket cash, fire good staff just for not kissing his ass." Daniel nodded slowly. "You're brave," he acknowledged. Jenna shook her head. "I'm tired," she said. He understood that feeling all too well. The kind of profound exhaustion that settles deep in one's bones. It was the kind of weariness that Black individuals often experience when they've had to prove their worth repeatedly just to gain entry into a space, and then felt compelled to remain silent once inside. He was not about to allow her to shoulder that burden alone. "I'll go in tomorrow," he stated. "Look around. If what you're saying holds up, I'll take care of it." Jenna hesitated. "Bryce doesn't play nice," she warned. "Neither does Glenn. If this blows up, it won't be just about me." "Glenn?" Daniel questioned. "You mean the regional guy?" She nodded. "He hired Bryce. Checks in once a month. They talk like they've got secrets." Daniel's jaw tightened. Glenn had been with him for many years. He was trusted, quiet, never attention-seeking. But Daniel had withdrawn in recent years, and Glenn had assumed more control than he likely should have. "I appreciate you telling me," Daniel said. "I'm just trying to give you the full picture," she replied. He started to walk away, then turned back. "Jenna," he said, "if you get pushback for talking to me, you tell them exactly who I am." "And who's that?" she asked. "The man who built this place," Daniel declared. He walked into the darkness, his boots echoing off the pavement. In his pocket, the key pressed against his leg like a tangible weight, evidence that someone inside still believed the truth was worth the danger. The next day, he would no longer be a stranger, nor would the deceptions hidden behind that kitchen door. The following morning, Daniel did not return home. He put on the same jacket, the same jeans, and the same scuffed boots. He did not want to appear like a boss yet. That image often prompted people to put on a false performance. What he needed was the unvarnished truth. He walked through the restaurant's front doors just before the lunch rush. The same host was working, his headphones barely concealed, tapping on a cracked iPad. "You again?" the host asked without looking up. Daniel nodded. "One of those weeks," he replied. The young man waved him toward a booth without another word. Daniel sat down, but he wasn't hungry. Not for food. He scanned the room. The staff moved more quickly today. A palpable tension still lingered in the air, like steam in a kitchen. But something had shifted. Jenna moved differently, not entirely relaxed, but lighter. She was still watching her back, however. He caught her eye as she passed. No words were exchanged, just a subtle nod. Then Bryce emerged from the back, his polo shirt taut across his abdomen, clipboard in hand, pretending to check something, but his eyes were fixed directly on Daniel. He approached the booth slowly, his forced, fake manager's smile barely holding. "Back again," he said. "Didn't think you'd be a regular." Daniel leaned back. "Food was solid," he replied. "Thought I'd see if it holds up 2 days in a row." Bryce chuckled, but it was tight and forced. "Well, if you got any notes, let me know. I've got a reputation for running a tight ship." Daniel's eyes did not waver from his. "I can tell," he stated. Bryce lingered for a moment, then walked off, but Daniel knew. He felt it. Bryce sensed that something was amiss. It was the kind of tension that builds when someone is on the verge of losing control they believed they possessed. Daniel finished his meal in silence, left cash on the table, walked out the front door, then circled around to the back alley. Jenna had fulfilled her part. The mop bucket was once again propping open the side door. He slipped in silently. The hallway was empty. In the back, the staff locker room was quiet, with only the faint hum of an overworked soda fridge and the buzz of a flickering overhead light. He located Bryce's locker, which was tall, dented, and labeled BL. The small silver key slid in and turned with a soft click. Inside sat a black duffel bag. Daniel unzipped it and found gym clothes, a bottle of cologne, and, tucked in a side pocket, a burner phone. It had no case and no passcode. Daniel scrolled through it. There was a list of contacts saved under initials, GTLMHQWED. He took photos of every screen, every message. Then he pulled open another side pocket of the bag and found something heavier. It was cash, tightly rolled with rubber bands, in small denominations and unmarked. It appeared that someone had been stashing register money off the books. Daniel zipped the bag back up and stepped into the manager's office next door. It carried the same sour smell of old takeout and stress. He opened the second drawer, Jenna's tip had been correct, and found a small black leather ledger. Inside the cover, a name was written, Langley's Daily Book. He opened it. The pages were filled with handwritten notes, inventory logs that did not match invoices, entries for alcohol with missing quantities, staff tips that had been rounded down, and hours that were scratched out and rewritten. He now possessed undeniable proof. But before he could slide it into his jacket, the door creaked open. Bryce stood there, arms crossed, devoid of his usual smile. "Now you think you're slick?" he said. Daniel remained motionless. "I should have known the way you walked in here," Bryce continued. "You didn't look scared enough to be just some customer." Daniel looked him directly in the eye. "You talk a lot for someone with dirty hands," he retorted. Bryce stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "You break into my locker, my office, And you think you're walking out of here like it's nothing? Daniel remained calm, still holding the ledger at his side. I'm not walking out as a customer, Bryce, he stated. I'm walking out as the man whose name is on the lease. The man who owns this place. Bryce blinked, clearly caught off guard. Daniel stepped forward, his voice low and measured. You've been stealing, threatening people, covering your tracks like a rookie, he said. But here's the thing. No matter how quiet you kept it, the paper never lies. Bryce's jaw tightened, and his fists clenched, but he did not move. You going to call security? Daniel asked. The police? Go ahead. Let's all compare notes. There was a long silence. Then Bryce laughed, a bitter, tired sound. You think this ends with me? You think I did all this by myself? Daniel squinted slightly. Glenn, he said. Bryce nodded once. You don't want to know how deep it goes, he warned. I already do, Daniel replied. Daniel walked past him, the ledger tucked into his jacket. He moved without fear or hurry, because now he had more than just a suspicion. He had evidence. And once you have evidence, the cover-up inevitably begins to collapse. The phone rang the next morning just after 9 a.m. Daniel was back at the motel, sitting at the chipped desk, organizing photos from Bryce's burner phone and the scanned pages from the black ledger. He wasn't tired, he was intensely focused. It was the kind of focus one achieves when realizing that trusted individuals have been systematically dismantling everything one built. The caller ID showed a local Arkansas number, with no name. He answered without a greeting. Dan, it's Glenn Tate, a voice said. Daniel remained silent, letting the quiet hang in the air. I heard you've been poking around Fort Smith, Glenn continued, his voice smooth with forced calm. Didn't think we'd need to talk like this, but here we are. Daniel leaned back in the chair, his eyes fixed on the photos on the table. You should have called sooner, Daniel stated. I didn't know it was that bad, Glenn claimed. Daniel chuckled once, a sharp, disbelieving sound. No, you just didn't want to know, he retorted. There was a pause on the line. Look, Glenn said, his smooth tone faltering slightly. Bryce was never polished, but we needed numbers to stabilize. He was getting it done. You mean he was stealing? Daniel pressed. I didn't know about that part. Don't lie to me, Glenn. Not now. Silence ensued. Daniel's voice remained steady. You don't hire someone like Bryce without knowing what he's willing to do, he explained. You brought him in to do the dirty work while you kept your hands clean. Glenn attempted to pivot the conversation. Then come on. We go way back, he appealed. You know how tough the market's been lately. Stores are closing left and right. Labor's expensive. People don't stay. You step back and suddenly all the pressure's on me. I had to make decisions. Decisions that got people robbed of hours, tips, peace of mind, Daniel countered. You're making this personal, Glenn accused. Daniel sat forward. It is personal, he asserted. I built this company to give people a shot. People like me who got passed over. And now I've got staff scared to ask for breaks because they don't know who's watching. Glenn's voice hardened. Look, I don't want this to get ugly. I'm trying to keep us clean here. Daniel almost laughed. Clean, he scoffed. You've got cash changing hands, backroom deals with liquor reps, forged logs, and a burner phone full of proof. You're not clean. You're just quiet. Another pause. What do you want? Glenn finally asked. Daniel didn't hesitate. I want you gone. Glenn scoffed. You can't make that call. You're semi-retired. I'm still the founder, Daniel stated. My name's still on every legal document. You think the board won't listen when they see how deep this mess runs? You go public with this, we all lose, Glenn snapped. The company's name, your name, it'll drag everyone down. Daniel stood, the phone still pressed to his ear. Then I guess you should have thought about that before you sold us all out, he concluded. He ended the call. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't need to. By 2 p.m., Alicia Knox had all the necessary materials. Scanned documents, screenshots of texts, notes, and the burner phone Daniel had delivered that morning. This is enough, she stated plainly. They'll fold. Good, Daniel affirmed. But Dan, if you pursue this completely, you're not merely dismissing one individual, Alicia warned. You're dismantling your long-standing structure. Are you prepared for that? Daniel looked her directly in the eye. I no longer desire that old structure, he declared. That night, Daniel entered the Fort Smith restaurant at closing time. He wore no jacket, no disguise, just himself. The staff glanced up, confused but no longer afraid. Jenna emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel. You okay? She asked. Daniel nodded. Meeting time, he announced. Everyone gathered in the dining room. Servers, line cooks, dishwashers, even the teenage host, were present. Daniel stood at the front, silent at first. You all deserve better, he finally stated, and I should have shown up sooner. No one spoke, they simply listened. Bryce is gone. Glenn's next. And anyone else who's been stealing or covering for them, you have one opportunity to leave on your own. Tomorrow morning, I begin rebuilding. And I'm doing it with people who genuinely care. He looked across the room at their faces, exhausted, cautious, but attentive. Jenna stood up, Daniel added. Alone. She had everything to lose and still spoke the truth. That's the kind of leadership I believe in. He turned back toward the kitchen. This place isn't broken, he affirmed. It was just in the wrong hands. Now we take it back. There was no applause or cheering, but heads nodded, shoulders visibly relaxed, and for the first time in months, people exhaled without fear. Daniel had not merely exposed the problem, he had declared war on it. However, what he did not realize was that Glenn had one more move, and it was coming sooner than anyone anticipated. 2 days later, Daniel received a manila envelope stamped with a corporate return address and urgent legal enclosure printed across the front. He was sitting in the motel lobby, drinking weak coffee from a styrofoam cup and reviewing vendor invoices. The envelope was thick, suggesting trouble before it was even opened. Inside, he found a cease and desist letter from the company's legal department. It contained accusations of slander, unauthorized entry into private property, and interference with regional operations, all signed by Glenn at the bottom. Daniel did not flinch. He had encountered such tactics before. Paper threats from individuals who believed silence could be coerced through intimidation. However, that particular strategy no longer worked on him. Not now. Not after everything he had witnessed. He picked up his phone and called Alicia. He's trying to scare me, he said, his voice even. Then you're getting close, Alicia replied. Let him file. That's not a fight he's ready for. Daniel leaned back in his chair, staring out the motel window. He didn't want a confrontation. He wanted accountability and genuine respect for the people who diligently kept these establishments running day after day. So he returned, not to corporate headquarters, not to Tulsa, but back to Fort Smith, back to his people. That evening, the restaurant was winding down. Tables were being cleared, receipts printed, and the kitchen's final fryer cycle hissed into silence. Daniel walked in through the side door. No hat, no disguise, just the same man who had founded this chain from scratch and was now present to salvage it from its internal decay. He found Jenna in the back, rinsing lemon wedges in a large plastic tub. Are you free for 5 minutes? He asked. She dried her hands, looked over her shoulder, and followed him to the office. He dropped the envelope on the desk. Glenn's trying to bury me, he stated. Jenna picked it up and read the first page, her lips tightening. You think it'll stick? She asked. Daniel shook his head. It's a smokescreen, but I'm tired of playing defense. She carefully folded the letter, setting it aside. So what do we do? She asked. Daniel looked her directly in the eye. We tell the truth, he said. She frowned slightly. To who? To everyone, Daniel replied. The next day, Daniel and Jenna met with a local reporter named Ken Holland, a seasoned journalist with a worn notebook, a 6-year-old laptop, and a reputation for publishing stories that powerful figures preferred to keep private. They met at a diner across town. Ken ordered sweet tea and began writing even before Daniel spoke. Jenna did most of the talking. She detailed the hours that had been illegally cut from records, the threats, the missing inventory, and the pervasive fear. But she also shared another aspect, the silence. The way everyone averted their gaze when Bryce entered the room. The way people had ceased to believe that anything would ever change. And then what happened? Ken inquired. Jenna glanced at Daniel. He walked in, she stated. Ken looked over his glasses at Daniel. You were undercover, he observed. I wasn't hiding, Daniel corrected. I was watching. Ken chuckled. Same thing if you ask corporate, he remarked. Daniel leaned forward. Here's what I care about, he emphasized. Not just fixing this place, but demonstrating to people that true leadership means showing up, especially when circumstances become difficult. Ken nodded, continuing to scribble. 2 hours later, they had a complete story. By the end of the weekend, it had spread everywhere. Headlines read, Undercover owner uncovers theft, abuse at local steakhouse, and whistleblower waitress helped expose it all. The article completely exposed the situation. Staff from other branches emailed Daniel directly, some offering apologies, others expressing gratitude. A few even shared stories from years prior, detailing similar issues at other locations with different managers, following the same corrupt pattern. Daniel responded to every message, not because he was obligated to, but because he understood that silence had contributed to the problem's genesis. And now it had to end. The following Monday, Jenna walked into the office before her shift and found an envelope with her name on it. Inside, there was an offer letter, full-time employment, benefits, a salary, and the title of general manager for the Fort Smith location. Jenna blinked in surprise. She read it 3 times. When she looked up, Daniel was already standing in the doorway, observing her. You serious? She asked. He nodded. You earned it, he affirmed. I don't know if I can. She started. You already have, he completed her sentence. She held the letter as if it might disintegrate in her hands. No one's ever backed me like this, she said, her voice filled with emotion. Daniel smiled faintly. You backed yourself, he clarified. I just made sure it stuck. That Friday, Jenna conducted her first full staff meeting. It was a quick huddle before opening. No grand speeches, just straightforward discussion. What was functioning well? What needed improvement? Who required assistance? Daniel stood quietly in the back, simply listening. No one was afraid anymore. But as the staff began to heal and leadership transitioned into the hands of deserving individuals, Daniel faced one final decision, one that would determine whether his legacy concluded here or merely began anew. The letter arrived this time with no threats, just an email from the CEO's office. The subject line requested an in-person meeting. Daniel agreed, but on his own conditions. No boardroom, no office tower, no suits. They met inside the Fort Smith restaurant on a Sunday afternoon. It was closed for cleaning, but Daniel ensured every staff member was still paid for the full day. He sat at table 7, where everything had begun. No hat, no disguise, just himself. The CEO entered alone, a tall man in his mid-50s, polished in appearance but displaying a certain uncertainty, as if he knew the ground he was treading on no longer truly belonged to him. Mr. Whitmore, he said, extending a hand. Daniel shook it, firmly but briefly. You've had quite a week, the CEO remarked, taking a seat across from him. No, Daniel replied, we've had quite a decade. I'm just the one cleaning it up. The CEO nodded slowly. We read the article. We saw the documentation. Glenn's been terminated. Legal is now working on vendor audits. Internal policies are being rewritten. Daniel did not smile. Good, he responded. We'd like to bring you back informally, the CEO continued, not full-time, but a seat at the table. Guidance, oversight. You're still the face of this brand whether you like it or not. Daniel leaned forward, elbows on the table. Then you start by showing up for the people you ignored, he began. The CEO blinked. I want back pay for the workers who had their hours cut. I want anonymous reporting lines for every location. I want health benefits extended to hourly staff starting here, and I want written policy changes in every kitchen by next month. The CEO hesitated. That's a tall list, he stated. Daniel did not flinch. I've spent my whole life being told what's too tall, he asserted. I'm not interested in limits anymore. There was a long pause. Then the CEO slowly nodded. "You'll have it. All of it," he conceded. Daniel extended his hand. This time, they shook hands genuinely. Later that evening, he walked back into the kitchen. Jenna was wiping down the counter. The place smelled of bleach and fresh rolls. He handed her an envelope. She opened it slowly. Inside, there was a $2,000 bonus. A note contained just 5 words, "For the day you spoke up." Jenna looked up, blinking back emotion. "I don't know what to say," she murmured. "You don't have to," Daniel said. "You already said the hard part." Over the next few weeks, the restaurant underwent a transformation, not just in its appearance, but in its operational rhythm. It was the kind of rhythm that emerges when people genuinely desire to be there. New hires were trained by experienced veterans who finally had a reason to care. Jenna led with fairness, not fear. Staff meetings evolved into problem-solving sessions, rather than disciplinary scoldings. And the food improved significantly. Because everything tastes different when you're not cooking under duress. Customers noticed. Word spread. The Fort Smith location was no longer the one to be avoided. It became the flagship restaurant once again. One afternoon, Daniel was handling paperwork in the office when a teenage dishwasher knocked on the door. Theo, a quiet and diligent young man, always stayed late to finish his tasks without being asked. "Mr. Whitmore," he began. "Yeah," Daniel responded. "My mom used to work for you at the Tulsa spot," Theo said. "She said you helped her out when my brother got sick. Gave her time off. Paid her anyway." Daniel looked up. "She always said you were different," Theo added. Daniel leaned back, surprised, but not entirely. "What's your last name?" he inquired. "Ramsey," Theo replied. Daniel nodded slowly. "Tell her I remember her," he said, "and tell her her kid's doing good work." Theo grinned as if he had just achieved something significant. That night, Daniel stayed late. Everyone else had departed. The only sounds were the low hum of the refrigerator and the soft buzz of the exit signs overhead. He sat at a booth with a plate of grits that Jenna had prepared for him earlier. There was no fancy presentation, just hot grits, 2 pieces of toast, and butter melting in the center. He took a bite, sat back, and looked around. This was never merely about steak. It was about people. The overlooked, the silenced, the ones who show up regardless. People like Jenna, like Theo, like the woman who worked double shifts with no childcare and never complained. Like the cook who showed up with a brace on his wrist because he couldn't afford to take a day off. Daniel wasn't attempting to save the restaurant industry as a whole. He was striving to preserve what little honesty remained within it. And perhaps, to rebuild the kind of place where individuals didn't have to whisper to be heard. If you have ever worked under someone who abused their power, or if you have been the one afraid to speak up, let this story serve as a reminder. Change does not originate with a title. It begins with courage. Speak up, show up, and support the people who risk everything to do what is right.